And the question to you, I don't deny the crimes of colonialism, not for a moment. I'd like to ask you a question. How long do former colonial countries have to be punished for then? One of the largest and most significant and longest colonial powers in history was the Turkish Empire. Do we do this to Turkey? Do we say to Turkey, you must have your identity erased as well as punishment for the past? Almost every single people in the world at some point has done something historically they could be punished for. But why, I wonder, is it that it is Europeans that we are always being heard, being offered that?
In one Q&A, a participant raises a point about colonialism, but Douglas Murray asks how long former colonial countries should be punished. Murray asks why only European colonialism is continuously highlighted and punished, while other historical empires like the Turkish Empire are not subjected to the same scrutiny. He asserts that nearly every group in history has engaged in actions that could be deemed punishable, but questions the selective focus on European colonialism.
How would you argue tonight, frankly speaking?
I would like to make a point to Mr. Murray, and I would like to ask you why you feel that the presence of 1 or 2 or 1,000 people with a different identity within a society threatens the identity of the people who were in the society originally. Whether you believe that is a legitimate concern or a primal fear, and whether you agree that when a primal fear drives a crowd, they become a mob, and that a politician should follow a mob and not provide leadership by calming the mob down and giving them a reason.
Thank you. And towards the back.
I am against the motion, and I would like to say that the European Union was an ex-colonial power, so most of the countries of the Third World were exploited from us. So now we cannot say that we don't accept them, because most of their riches and their wealth were taken from us. And Mr. Voridis talked about our values as European citizens, as humans. Well, I think globalization takes them from us and not immigrants.
Colonialism indeed had devastating effects, exploiting nations and their people. However, Murray's point brings attention to a broader historical context. The Ottoman Empire, for instance, was one of the longest reigning empires, exerting control over vast regions. Yet there isn't a constant discourse demanding Turkey to face perpetual guilt and punishment for its past actions. This selective memory of history leads to an imbalance in addressing historical wrongs. The Turkish Empire controlled large parts of Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa for centuries. Despite its significant role in history, current discussions rarely focus on its colonial past. Murray uses this example to question the one-sided narrative that tends to perpetuate guilt among European nations while ignoring other historical empires.
Your response, particularly to that challenge to you.
Very quickly, first of all, if I were Hassan in Syria, I would hope, among other things, that I would help to rebuild my country after the Assad dynasty had wrecked it so completely. I'd hope that I would stay and help to rebuild the country after the devastation caused by that family. Secondly, the gentleman here who said, why are you threatened by 1 or 2 people? I'm not threatened by 1 or 2 people. Nobody is threatened by 1 or 2 people.
Murray also tackles the issue of immigration. In response to a question about the fear of immigrants, he emphasises that his concern is not about individual immigrants, but the scale of immigration. He points out that when immigration happens too rapidly, integration becomes challenging. Using London as an example, he notes that white British citizens are now a minority in the city. This demographic shift is not merely about a few people, but represents a significant and rapid change.
As we do every week, it's time to speak to the best-selling author of The War on the West, The Strange Death of Europe and The Madness of Crowds. Douglas Murray, let's start in the UK, the state of policing in the UK, the extremist rhetoric from some UK-based Islamic preachers, and the state of the media. ITV decided to give a platform to this woman who, in the wake of the terrorist attacks in Israel that left 1,400 dead and more than 200 taken hostage, well, she was on ITV complaining about Islamophobia in the UK. This is Latifa Abushakra, And this is what she had to say after the October 7 attack.
Nothing will ever be able to take back this moment of triumph, this moment of resistance, this moment of surprise, this moment of humiliation on behalf of the Zionist entity. Nothing ever.
Douglas, the glee, the joy there, it's psychotic.
Yes, it's psychotically evil. It's evil on an unimaginable magnitude that anyone could react to the deliberate slaughter of civilians of any kind, anywhere in the world like that. If this was to be anybody else who'd said that about the murder of any other minority or any other nationality, they would be nowhere near civilized society. In fact, they'd be ostracized, probably chased out. But this woman was actually invited by ITV onto one of those main channels, and she talked about how tough it is to be Muslim in Britain. She had a very different demeanor that day, I can tell you, Rita. It wasn't the gleeful, grinning maniac psychotic. She put on a meek, humble and worried look as she talked about how difficult it is to be a Muslim in Britain. Now, as I say, we are being played. We are being played in countries like ours. We have a certain type of psychopath like this who gets away with, on the one hand, praising the murder of Jews wherever they can, and on the other hand, playing the, oh, I'm such a victim and it's so terrible living in a Western free society because you're so mean about Muslims. On the other, we're being played, and we need to be a lot wiser to that fact.
Now to the police, and we have seen the constabulary have some very tolerant approaches when it comes to what constitutes hate speech in the UK. We've had Islamists chant for jihad and freeing Palestine from the river to the sea. We know what that means. But there was no such tolerance for Isabel Warren Spruce, who was standing near an abortion clinic. Now, she was not harassing anybody going in. She was not chanting anything. She was not protesting. She was simply praying silently when the cops showed up. Let's have a look.
Are you here to pray for the lives of unborn children?
It's a little bit leading, but no, I'm not.
Okay. Can your actions be carried out elsewhere?
I can pray elsewhere, but I want to pray here today.
Douglas, thank God she didn't accidentally, I don't know, misgender someone, or she could be spending life in jail. What is going on in the UK?
You know, this Christian campaigner was standing in the vicinity of an abortion clinic, and she was questioned by police because she was praying in her head. This has happened before with her. And she was asked by that, the clip we didn't see, the officer says to her, are you a member of a pro-life organization? Well, a few days earlier, thousands of Muslims from the UK, predominantly Muslims, some non-Muslims as well, walked through the centre of London and other cities in favour of a pro-death organisation. And the police didn't harass or stop them. In fact, when bearded Muslim men stood outside one of the embassies in London last Saturday and called for jihad and for the Muslim armies to arise, the Metropolitan Police didn't seem to find it an issue of any concern. They stood around rather helpfully. Subsequently, the crack Quran interpretation squad at the Metropolitan Police issued a statement saying word jihad has multiple...
Integration works effectively when it occurs gradually, allowing both immigrants and native populations to adapt and understand each other. Historically, immigration was a slow process, and communities had the time to integrate newcomers. However, the modern pace of immigration is much faster, leading to the creation of parallel societies where immigrants do not necessarily blend into the local culture, but form their own isolated communities. The rapid pace of immigration can be seen in various European cities, cities. In Germany, entire neighbourhoods have developed where native Germans feel out of place. This isn't just about cultural differences, but also about the lack of integration. A study in 2018 revealed that 42% of Germans felt their culture was under threat due to immigration. Similarly, in Sweden, rapid immigration has resulted in areas where even the police hesitate to enter, highlighting the lack of integration and the resulting social issues.
Different meanings. No, it doesn't. Not when it's a big bearded maniac screaming for jihad on the streets of London. That isn't a man calling for an inner personal spiritual struggle with the nature of the deity. No, it's somebody calling for violence against the infidel. But the Met's not interested in that. And it's fascinating, by the way. It's just fascinating the priorities here. We have had in Britain our national monuments desecrated by the presence of these pro-death organizations. The cenotaph, the memorial to the dead of World War I and World War II in Britain and the Commonwealth, had the stage set up beside it for these maniac Jew haters to have their rallies. Well, okay, fine. We have sacred places, and that's one of them. That's one of them. And yet the Metropolitan Police allows the Islamists to defile this week after week. And they go for this poor Christian campaigner praying silently in her head. As I say, she should have said, no, I'm not praying silently in my head for unborn children. I'm just going to scream, jihad, jihad, slay the infidel. And the officer would have said, oh, well, go on your way, madam. Have a wonderful rest of the day.
Now to the US, and there again seems to be a preoccupation with Islamophobia, even as Jews are being targeted at university campuses and in major cities across the US. Here is White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre being asked about anti-Semitism, but instead she talks about Islamophobia.
Muslim and those perceived to be Muslim have endured a disproportionate number of hate-fueled attacks. And certainly President Biden understands that many of our Muslim Arab...
Murray's argument is not rooted in prejudice, but in the practical realities of managing immigration. He emphasises the need for a sustainable pace of immigration that allows for proper integration. This perspective challenges the oversimplified view that concerns about immigration are merely prejudicial. Instead, it points to the necessity of balancing immigration with the capacity for integration. Another important aspect of the debate revolves around the financial crisis in Europe. A participant suggests that immigrants are being scapegoated for the crisis. Murray refutes this by stating that the crisis is primarily blamed on bankers and financiers, not immigrants. The 2008 financial crash, for example, led to widespread condemnation of the banking sector, not immigrants. This point underscores the importance of focusing on the actual cause of economic crises rather than diverting blame. The financial mismanagement by banks and financial institutions played a significant role in the economic downturn. Movements like Occupy Wall Street targeted the financial elite, highlighting the real culprits behind the crisis. Shifting the blame to immigrants is not only unjust, but also diverts attention from addressing the real issues.
Arab Americans and Palestinian American loved ones and neighbors are worried about the hate being directed at their communities, and that is something you heard the president speak to in his address.
Douglas, today I saw footage of Jewish students trapped in a library, not able to leave because there were protesters outside and they feared for their safety. And yet the White House, again, preoccupied with Islamophobia.
Yeah, I saw that same footage, Rita. I also read an account of one of the students these were just Jewish students who had to be locked in a room for their own safety as crowds outside chanted pro-Palestinian slogans. Can you imagine any other community where this would be acceptable? Apparently, by the way, the Jewish students were offered various ways out by some of the college people there, including the possibility they could hide in the attic. You sometimes wonder if anybody has any knowledge of history anymore. Anyway, yes, this is always the norm. It goes back to where we started, Rita. Always the playbook is Jews are murdered by Muslim fanatics. Large majorities of Muslim communities in the West fail to condemn said fanatics. certain proportions seem to go along with them. Muslims promptly call victim on themselves, and the Jews are blamed. That's the way around. I will guarantee in the days and weeks ahead, there will be no protests of Jews in the West massively targeting Muslim students, for instance, simply for being Muslim. There will not be a campaign of vile harassment on innocent Muslims who happen to be going about their business by large crowds of Jews. But that is the case with Muslims against Jews. And yet it is the Muslims who are still seen as the victims in this situation. And as for the White House, I mean, they just can't decouple these things. They can't just say, look, actually, the statistics such as we have show that anti-Jewish hate crime has massively peaked in all of our countries in the last fortnight, in the last 2 weeks. There has been no massive rise in Islamophobia. But, by the way, if they do want to talk about these two things, they could mention the fact that if there's any such thing as Islamophobia, it comes about because of the behavior of radical Muslims. And if the rest of the Muslims in the world want to do something about so-called Islamophobia, they could do something about the radical Muslims. That's what I'd like to hear about from them.
Now, moving along to publications that were once respected. Scientific American is one such publication. It was once widely trusted and expected to live up to its name. But sadly, Douglas, we've seen even science and medicine corrupted by far-left ideology. In a new piece by two academics, we had this lunacy published, and I'll quote here: "The inequity between male and female athletes is a result not of inherent biological differences between the sexes, but of biases in how they are treated in sports." Douglas, it's frightening when even the field of science is abandoning evidence-based theories in favour of ideology.
It is. It's just amazing, isn't it? I mean, how can anybody claim that with a straight face? But they do, and they claim it with a straight academic face. This is one of the ways we can tell in our era with 100% certainty if we are being lied to.
Murray's arguments also touch upon the role of identity in the context of immigration. He is questioned about the fear that the presence of immigrants with different identities poses to the native population's identity. Murray responds by emphasising that the concern is not about individual differences, but about the scale and speed of immigration, which can lead to the erosion of local identities.
How do you think Gays for Gaza will get on long term?
Well, the joke at the moment is that there aren't enough tall buildings in Gaza to throw Gays for Gaza off. But these people are, I've said very often, they're part of the same phenomenon as turkeys for Christmas and chickens for KFC. I mean, I'm fed up with these fringe idiot cases. I mean, they're so mentally defective, these people, and incredibly narcissistic. I can be queer and also celebrate Palestine. No, you fucking can't. Fuck off. Just, I can both argue for a two-state solution and also celebrate queerness and also not let myself down. No, you can't. No, you can't. You can't do all those things. At some point, you've got to choose. I've got a video to show you. Let me show you this video.
Can someone please explain to me what this means? What does reproductive justice mean? Free Palestine. What does that even mean? Like, what does it mean? I'm not pretty sure. Abortions are illegal in Palestine unless it's like, a super medical emergency and the mother will die. From what I understand, actually a lot of Palestinians have to go to Israel to get the abortions they want. So what does this mean?
Yeah.
What? It's such a huge sign. There's 5 people holding this thing. It's massive.
That's very good. That's Danny, the other half of Ryan, who wasn't there the day that you came.
Yeah, boys cast. Yeah,
reproductive justice means free Palestine. What do you think?
This is just incredibly ignorant young people in America who have been taught this weird version of the world where all oppressions interlink and interlock, and you're either the majority or the minority for minority rights and issues, or for majority rights and issues, and all minority rights and issues intersect and overlap, so that if you're queer, somehow no, it's not even that. These ignoramuses who couldn't point to the River Jordan if you showed it to them on a map, walk along the streets of America shouting, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Because they think the Palestinians are the underdogs in this weird version where they've mapped they've mapped a very specific version of American racial politics onto everything else in the world. It's the same thing people who talk about colonizers. I mean, there's this language of colonizers, apartheid, all this stuff. And they've just tried to map it everywhere. Well, I say everywhere. Actually, it's highly selectively. I mean, the people who are talking about Israelis being colonizers, when I saw that the other day on the streets of London, I thought, yes, if only there was a name for large numbers of people who came from outside to a country. And if only we could identify what they might be called in Britain. Oh, it would be immigrants, wouldn't it? Do you want to call immigrants colonizers in Britain? You sure you want to follow this logical conclusion? The talk about indigenous peoples. Oh, okay, great. Anyway, you don't want to apply that. Might there be a country or a continent, say, Europe, where you don't want to start talking about the indigenous peoples? I notice that people don't. But if you do want to, welcome to hell. So, no, all that is happening is a very selective mapping of a particular interpretation of the world that very dumb people in America have tried to put on certain selective other cases. And it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. But may they never find out how much it doesn't work. May they never find out. I wish them bliss in their ignorance, because if their ignorance ever gets popped, it will be as brutal a day as can be imagined.
I've been thinking for a good while about how hypocrisy is a purpose-built tool for the internet to use. It's like catnip for the internet. It's the thing, because the reason it's so purpose-built, it's like one of those can you spot the difference competitions on a touchscreen iPad. This is what's on the left, this is what's on the right. And what you have is, here's something that someone once said, or a position that they used to hold, and here is what they hold now, or here is what they do in their real life, or here is whatever. Yeah. And it's kind of what you're identifying here, that you have a worldview which is self-contradictory. You're just using different words for one thing that is almost exactly the same for another thing. Right. And then complaining about this one, saying don't look over here at this one. Yeah.
Well, I mean, everyone is inconsistent to some extent.
The issue of identity is complex and multifaceted. On one hand, diversity enriches societies by bringing in new perspectives and cultures. On the other hand, rapid demographic changes can lead to a sense of loss among native populations. This is not about primal fear, but about the psychological and social impact of rapid change. People naturally seek a sense of belonging and continuity in their cultural identity.
Extent. And I don't think, by the way, that I mean, on hypocrisy, or for instance, I can see a scenario where somebody might say, "Oh, Douglas, you're hypocritical on this particular question." I might say, "Well, there are some things I think are even more important than not being a hypocrite, such as, I don't know, surviving." The worst thing about him is hypocrisy, and there's a weird. Hypocrisy is the easiest one to catch people on, is the truth of that.
Correct. Yes.
It's the easiest one to spot.
Yes.
You just and they do it, as you say, on this is what this person said 20 years ago, this is what they say now. Okay. Again, human being in growing up, shocker.
Yes.
Yeah. People are allowed to evolve, they change their minds, they grow up. It'd be rather boring to say the same thing and think the same thing only for 70 years. But yeah, people find hypocrisy very, very easy to see, and it's about the only vice you can really catch somebody on, I think, which is if you say one thing publicly and do another thing privately. It's about the only one that people are really confident on. Or most other moral judgments, for better or worse, have sort of ebbed away, but people still are able to judge hypocrisy. But I think, I think there are worse things. I think not standing up for your loved ones, not standing up for your country, not standing up for yourselves in the face of horrible opposition from within and without are probably worse than hypocrisy.
I heard you say recently, you don't have to agree with everyone's principle to respect the principle they're sticking to.
Did I say that? Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, it's nice.
Okay. I didn't know I said that, but yeah.
You did.
Okay.
But the reason that I like that is I think it shows why the bravery conversation or standing up for something that you believe in is something that is at least then if someone is prepared to stand up for whatever their beliefs are, that you can assume they're telling the truth, especially if they pay a high price for it. It's one of the reasons why I have a good amount of faith that Sam believes the things that he says.
Yeah. Well, why would he not?
He pays an unbelievably high price to continue to flip-flop from one tribe to another tribe to another tribe.
I don't think it's an unbelievably high price, but a price, let's say.
Relatively high price, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, very early in some people's careers, or when people first make it to public notice, people say things like, do you really believe what you say? The answer to which for most people is, or ought to be, well, why would I say it if I didn't believe it? There are people who obviously do say stuff for lols or clicks or monetary purpose, but at a certain point, I mean, you got to accept that the person thinks what they think and, respect them for it, or at least do them the decency of believing that they mean it. And I think that even on people I disagree with wildly. I mean, it's such a boring argument, that one. Some people use it, particularly on the left. It's like, I wonder if they actually even believe it. I think they don't. I think they're just doing it for money. Okay, well, that's an easier way to try to ignore them than actually trying to contend with the possibility that what they're saying is something they mean and believe, and trying to work out if there's anything in it. Much easier to say the person's only doing it because they're paid or something.
In other news, this episode is brought to you by Maui Nui Venison. Maui Nui Venison brings the healthiest red meat on the planet direct to your door. Not only is it the most nutrient-dense meat on the planet, they're the only 100% stress-free, wild-harvested venison that you can get. Here's my super secret hack. If you are sick of buying meat that always goes off, put it in the freezer, from frozen, salt both sides of it, put it in an air fryer for 10 to 12 minutes each side, and you have a perfectly cooked steak from frozen that will never go off because it's going from freezer to mouth in the space of 25 minutes. It's a complete game changer. All of their cuts are spectacular, and you can get them frozen, delivered to your door. But their venison sticks are my favorite while I've been on the road. You can get the healthiest red meat on the planet delivered directly to your door and get 20% off by going to the link in the description below or heading to mauinuivenison.com/modernwisdom and using the code modernwisdom at checkout. That's MAUINUI venison.com/modernwisdom and modernwisdom at checkout.
Murray's discussion on identity highlights the importance of balancing immigration with the need to maintain social cohesion. When immigration happens too quickly, it can create friction between different communities, leading to tensions and conflicts. This is not a call to stop immigration, but to manage it in a way that fosters integration and mutual understanding. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and for more content like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel.